Welcome to this week's Peaceful Eating live Q&A. I'm Vanya Fatidis from Peaceful Eating, where I help women all over the world come to a place of peace with food and their bodies so that they feel at ease in their own skin, relaxed around food, and really just able to live their lives unapologetically. That's what I really want for people, to be able to live their lives without feeling bad about who they are, what they do, how they eat, what they look like. So each week I answer as many questions as I can in about 20 minutes, half an hour. And you can ask a question anonymously via my website, peacefuleating.co.uk forward slash, oh dear, I'm a bit tongue tied. I'm not sure how this is going to go today, forward slash questions and answers. Or you can just follow the tab and you can ask an anonymous question that way. I'd love to answer any of your questions about food, eating, body image. So today I've got two questions. The one is about secret eating, and the other one is about the UK government's latest response to COVID-19, which is like a national drive to get people to lose weight. So let me get started, because I have a feeling that is going to be quite a juicy topic. Okay, so here's the first question about the secret eating. I'm struggling with not being able to resist food that is just there. Regardless if I'm hungry or not, I will just eat it without enjoying it or even wanting it. I have FOMO with food. Before I know it, I can have consumed a lot of food. I also eat secretly. I often have sweets and chocolate hidden in my bags to be eaten when my husband or daughter are out of the room. Again, this is just shoveled in quickly and frantically before I'm found out. This is a behavior learned from my mum and one I'm desperate to conquer and stop before history repeats itself and I pass it on to my 10-year-old daughter. I finally feel ready to and want to tackle this, and any help or support with this would be amazing. I feel you, really, and I'm sure there are many, many people listening or watching this who have either been in the same boat or are in the same boat as you. So let us think about this. There are four things that I think that you are saying. The one is that if you see food, you want it, regardless of your hunger, fullness, or even desire. That you eat a lot of food without much awareness, you just kind of shovel it down. That you eat secretly and hide food from particularly your husband and your daughter, and that you feel some guilt. You didn't say the word shame, but just from my own experience, I would guess that there is also shame in feelings of shame around this behavior. So let's think about this. I would say that all of these behaviors come down to one thing, which is restriction. So there's physical restriction and there's mental or emotional restriction. And what it means, if you're physically restricting, you're actually actively dieting or actively not having certain foods. Now, what you're telling me is that you are eating those foods, you're just not eating them in front of your family. So what I would suggest is happening is that you have got mental and emotional restriction going on with regard to eating these particular types of food. So what are mental and emotional restriction? Mental restriction is telling yourself you shouldn't eat these things, that they're bad for you, they're unhealthy, they're going to make you gain weight, you're addicted to them. Once you start, you can't stop. So you have a bunch of ideas in your mind about yourself in relation to eating these foods and about the foods themselves that you tell yourself you shouldn't have them or you shouldn't have this much of them. So that's the mental restriction part. It's all the shoulds and shouldn'ts around the food. And then there's the emotional restriction, which is you're restricting yourself from emotional permission to eat the food. So even though you're eating them, you're feeling a lot of guilt around eating them. Now, any kind of restriction around food is probably for people who have difficulty with food, not for every single person on the planet necessarily, but for people who have difficulty around food, particularly for people who either diet or try to diet, or maybe have given up dieting but think they should be, certainly should be trying to control their weight in some way, will have mental and emotional restriction around food. So even though you might not be physically restricting yourself from eating chocolates and sweets, mentally and emotionally you are restricting yourself. And what you restrict, this you then want, you crave more. Okay, so a sense of deprivation, even if it's not actually depriving yourself, a sense of deprivation will cause um, the craving and the desire for certain foods. So, my question to you is, why do you not want your husband and your daughter to see you eating these foods? What kind of um, structure have you set up around this? Are you telling them you're on a diet? Are you thinking you should be on a diet? But maybe not your daughter, but is your husband thinking you should be losing weight? Or maybe it's got nothing to do with him. Maybe it's just you who is thinking you shouldn't be eating these things. I know what used to happen with me was, yes, I was either on a diet or thinking I should be on a diet, or I was completely binging in preparation for going on a diet. And I also had a lot of rules around food and lots of beliefs around food. You know, sugar is bad, carbs are bad, refined foods or processed foods. I mean, literally, lots of things are processed that we wouldn't have, tinned chopped tomatoes, that's processed. So any of those, any foods that we, what I call forbidden foods, the foods that we think we shouldn't be eating if we're trying to lose weight, right? The high carbohydrate, high fat, high sugar combination of those sorts of foods. Um, when we when I had this thing set up that I shouldn't be eating any of these foods, and so of course then I was desiring them more. But what I was presenting to my family was that I didn't eat these foods. In fact, my children thought that I didn't eat sugar for the longest time because they never saw me eating sugar, because I was being good. Not that I said that to them, but in my mind, I was being good, and I didn't want to give them a bad example about eating sugar because I didn't think it was good. So I wanted to set a good example to my children about not eating sugar, so that hopefully they would not eat sugar or not eat very much of it. But what this set up was a kind of barrier, so that whenever we were out together or even at home, I would be the one who wouldn't be eating the chocolate or the sweets or whatever. But you can bet your bottom dollar that I would be eating it afterwards when they were not around or they were in bed or literally out of the room, as you say. So I'm curious about, when you say this is something you learned from your mum, what was the setup in your home around this, around eating and sugary foods and all of that? What was your mum doing? Was she always on a diet? Was she kind of watching her weight or trying to lose weight? Because this is the setup that I would guess has happened and is possibly continuing to happen in your own life. What is wrong with eating chocolate and sweets? Does your husband eat chocolate and sweets? Does your daughter eat chocolate and sweets? Do other people, in your life eat chocolate and sweets? Why is it a bad thing? Why have you set it up to be something that you feel guilty about or ashamed about? I mean, I know why. It's because diet culture has set it up that way. The environment we're in keeps giving us that message, and you can bet that with this new government policy coming in around trying to get the nation to lose weight, it is going to be driving home even more. But what I want you to know is that there's room to be eating a wide variety of food, and there is room for chocolate and sweets in it as well. And it will be a healthy thing for your daughter if you were able to model that to her, that you can eat everything, and it's about creating some kind of balance, but not in a rigid way. It's really about giving yourself permission. So, what I would suggest that you do is first work on giving yourself permission to eat those foods in a calm way without guilt before you necessarily do it with your husband and daughter. But you could also just go for it, right? The way to not eat secretly is to not eat secretly, bottom line, right? But it's what's underneath that that is making you eat secretly. So, how do you give yourself permission? So, in other words, can you eat in front of yourself? Can you eat these foods in front of yourself before you think about eating them in front of your husband and your daughter? So I know what I used to do is I would, go to the supermarket. I would know that, I was going to be eating whatever. I know that when I get home, I'm not going to give myself permission to eat those things. And the shame and the guilt and all of that was too much at that point. I needed to learn how to do it for myself first before I felt able to do it in front of other people. And so that's what I did. I would either find times when there was no one in the house, or I would just do it in the car, but I wouldn't do it while driving in the car, and I wouldn't do it while doing anything else in the car, not on my phone, not listening to the radio, just eating the food. So this is something that you can try, is to have the sweets and the chocolates when your daughter and your husband are maybe out of the house, and you're doing it in a relaxed way, and you're telling yourself that it's perfectly fine to eat sweets and chocolate, because it is, right? I promise you the sky will not fall down. You do it anyway. It's not that you're not eating them. You do it anyway. It's about how you're doing it that needs to change. So be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, take a few breaths, and eat some chocolate, some sweets, or whatever, like maybe sitting at a table, maybe putting it in a nice bowl, or on a plate, or choose really nice things for yourself, and really enjoy it. Eat them, savor them, taste them, notice the taste. Ask yourself if you're liking it or not liking it. And if you're not liking it, then maybe choose something else. But that's the first thing that I would recommend, is giving yourself the permission to eat the foods in a in front of yourself, is the only way I can see it. As if you're sitting down with yourself. You had a good friend sitting with you. So when you're on your own, eat as if you're eating in front of other people. And that would be the first step. And then depending on what you've set up with your family, that might require a conversation. It's like if your daughter never sees you eating chocolate or sweets, or your husband has never seen you eating chocolates or sweets, then maybe you need to have a kind of a conversation about it and say, I've realized that actually this is not how I want to be, um, and it's actually a good thing to eat, you know, these kind of highly pleasurable foods, or whatever you want to call them. Just call them by what they are, chocolate and sweets. Maybe this is not a conversation to have with your daughter, but perhaps with your husband. And I don't know what your relationship is like and how open you feel that you can be, but you know, ask more questions if you like, and I'll see if I can help. And if you want more kind of targeted one-to-one help, then of course I'm here to help with that too. You can book yourself in for a discovery session. We can talk about that. But otherwise, you could send me another question, tell me if I'm hitting the mark or not hitting the mark. And hopefully you've read my ebook, A Guide to Peaceful Eating. And if not, I suggest you do go and download it, because there's only so much I can respond to in this, short amount of time. And there's so much more depth and detail in my Guide to Peaceful Eating, which you can get at peacefuleating.co.uk/subscribe. All right. I hope that was helpful. let me move on to the next question. So the next two questions are both about the new policy that is coming out from the government around trying to get the nation to lose weight as a kind of protection if people get COVID-19. The and it is a belief at this point is that they would have a better outcome if they were thinner or if they'd lost weight. And I say it's a belief because there isn't so far any evidence to show, okay, this group of people have actually lost weight and got COVID and had better outcomes on a statistically significant level compared to this group that didn't lose weight and were in bigger bodies and got COVID and statistically significantly had poorer outcomes. So that would be a trial, that hasn't been done, and I don't even know if it would be possible to do. But I hope that if they are able to gather that kind of information, that down the line, when we're through this and they do meta-analyses of all of the data, that they will consider that and see if actually getting people who used to be fat thinner, actually on a statistical level, they do have better health outcomes. I don't know. You know why? Because it's really hard to find people who used to be on the higher end of the weight spectrum, then in the quote unquote normal range of the weight spectrum, and stay there for a long enough period of time for there to be measurements of health outcomes. This body of people just doesn't exist. Why? Because dieting ends up with almost everybody eventually within 2 to 5 years people will regain the weight. So, having that group of people for a long enough period of time to do these kinds of analyses just doesn't exist, which kind of makes you think it's a bit pointless. So, here are the things that people have asked about. How can we deal with the added pressure and stigma that this new policy will bear upon us? And are there any strategies you can use to avoid all the shame and anxiety provoked by the government announcement about the anti-obesity campaign and how it can cut your risk of COVID complications? So you must lose weight, and the implication that it's as easy as riding your bike everywhere and not eating junk food. Also the way that this conflicts with the encouragement of half price incentives. Oh dear, I can see that my camera's gone a bit fuzzy. So, before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the whole question about whether people at the higher end of the weight spectrum are indeed at greater risk of contracting and or having poorer outcomes if they contract COVID-19. And the first thing I'll say is I'm not a medical professional, and I'm not a statistician, and I'm not a scientific researcher. And so I can't speak to any of that evidence that is being put out there. But there are people who are medical professionals who can do the statistics and run the numbers, and who are doing it and do have things to say about this that is really, really helpful. And I will defer to those people. I do trust them. And because I've seen over the years the kind of critical analysis that they bring to bear on this kind of information, not just about this, but in general, the relationship between weight and health. And, the foremost person that I would be following if you're interested in this is Fiona Willer from Health Not Diets on Facebook. Don't know if she's on Instagram, but she posts a lot on Facebook. She has a podcast called Unpacking Weight Science, which is fantastic, really is fantastic. Also, recently she was on the Untrapped podcast, which is Louise Adams's podcast. She's from Australia, so is Fiona from Australia, and three of them, Louise, Fiona, and Jess Campbell, who is a nutritionist and a student doctor in New Zealand. They got together a couple of months ago, I think it was now, and they did 2 episodes really looking at the data that had been collected so far. And those 2 episodes are really worth listening to if you're interested in understanding how some of these assumptions are made, but also understanding, um, you know, how to think more critically about this kind of data. And I think it's really important to be doing that. So if that's one thing that I would suggest actually is inform yourself about it. And so go to Untrapped, listen to those 2 COVID-19 podcasts. They're excellent show notes where they give you links to things that you can follow. There's also Joshua Woolrich on Instagram and on Facebook, and he has a lot to say about this and this about weight and health in general. So it's about seeking out people that you can trust around this. Another person to follow, and I only follow him on Twitter, I don't know where else he posts, is Dr. Ollie Williams. And he's a sociologist, and he is very interested in the social determinants of health. And one of the things that I have seen that he has posted recently about this was that, again, what the government is doing, it is putting this on us as a personal responsibility rather than looking at the bigger picture of health in the nation. And, people who are poor, people who are out of work, people who are struggling to make ends meet, even if they are just making ends meet. People who live in overcrowded situations, people who don't have clean air to breathe and clean and safe spaces in which to move around are going to have poorer health outcomes. And so, it's a way what the government is doing is shirking really its responsibility. If it's very concerned about the health of the nation, why can't we make this about the health of the nation? How can we improve access to fresh fruit and vegetables affordably to all people? How can we make it so that the way that work is set up is such that people actually do have the time and the energy to make food at home? How do we reduce food deserts in certain neighborhoods? These are very big, expensive, and tricky problems to solve. And it's a shortcut to say, let's get the nation out to lose weight. I read an article the other day that said that some of the conservatively held, unfortunately, councils, well, not surprisingly, but unfortunately, in England have already backtracked on plans to improve cycle lanes for inhabitants in their area. So, you can't tell people they need to get healthier and then not provide the avenues for them to get healthier. And so cycle lanes will definitely make things safer and healthier for people. So backtracking on that is not okay. There's just so much I can say about this, seriously. I mean, the government are wanting to pull the local people's ability to have a say in planning that goes on in their own areas. And so what that's going to mean is that shoddily built, cramped, too small housing spaces are going to be built for people to live in. This is not good for people's health. So if the government is really concerned about the nation's health, they need to be looking at a broad brush. I mean, not broad brush, but at a broad spectrum of things that need to change in the way that we live, in the way our economy works, in how people get access to support when they need it, etc., rather than telling them to go and lose weight for the winter so that they can, have a better outcome if they get COVID-19. Now, I'm not denying that there may be a correlation between people at the higher end of the weight spectrum and their outcome if they get COVID-19. Not going to argue that. I do not know because I'm not somebody who's crunching the numbers and really um, looking at the raw data and all of that. That's not my field. So let's just take that as given that there's a correlation. What the government is doing and what the media are doing are pointing to weight as a causative factor in poorer COVID-19 outcomes rather than that there's a correlation. And there can be many reasons for the correlation. And they are not controlling for all these different possibilities, and some of them are impossible to control for. One of them is weight stigma, the shame of being in a heavier body. So you can't control for that because if you're in a heavier body and you've been told your whole life that you should be losing weight, that you're a ticking time bomb, that you're going to be dead by 40 or whatever it is that you might have been told, whether it's directly from your doctor, which I know people who've been told this kind of thing, or if it's just you've read it in the media, you will be holding stress in your body, and stress is bad for your immune system. It's bad for your health in general, chronic stress. So it's difficult to control for everything that is correlated with being in a heavier body. What we know is that it is of the things that we can control, um, in terms of our potential health outcomes. There's lots we can't control, but of the things we can control, there are a few things that we can do that will keep you healthier regardless of any weight change. And those are things like, yes, moving your body. Definitely, if you can. Obviously, there's some people who are ill and can't, or have chronic conditions and can't. But if you can, then that is one thing you could be doing. Yes, eating fruit and vegetables, but not turning that into a stressful thing. Not eating food you don't like or you don't enjoy because you think you have to. That is not going to be sustainable. So for sure, finding maybe increasing your fruit and veg intake can definitely make you feel better pretty much immediately, actually. Not smoking. If you're a smoker, that's one thing you really could focus on stopping. And I know it's hard, but it can be done with good support, and there are programs out there that can help with that. Um, Drinking alcohol within or below your national guidelines, that is also going to improve your health. So those are just 4 things that you could be doing. And in fact, there's one really big study that looks at these 4 behaviors and its relationship to BMI. And actually, if you are doing these 4 behaviors, the impact of your BMI, not a great term, but actually, the categories of different weights, is flat in terms of early death or risk of death. So if you're doing all 4 of those behaviors and you're in a bigger body, your risk of death isn't going to be any higher than somebody in the mid-range or the lower end of the BMI scale. And obviously, in terms of COVID-19 or any kind of infectious transmitted illness. Wash your hands, sneeze into your elbow, don't touch your face, those kinds of things. Keep your 2 meter distance from people, etc. Wear your mask when you're outside and you can't maintain a 2 meter distance. All right. What I was actually asked was about the shame and the anxiety. And what I would say is, you do you. Maybe stay away from social media. Perhaps only go to places that feel safe to you, like my Facebook group. It's not about the weight, is a safe place for you to be. Get out of any groups and unfollow any pages that are um, promoting a particular way of eating or of trying to lose weight. Just do not follow anything that is a weight loss promotion. If you do need to visit your doctor, um, something that I would suggest you do is say something like, um, I have tried to lose weight my whole life. All that's happened is I end up gaining more weight, or I regain the weight, and this is really bad for my mental health, and I'm not doing it anymore. But what I am doing is focusing on changing my relationship with food, building in more movement that I really enjoy, and it's really helping me. So I don't want to have the conversation about losing weight. I'm focusing on health promoting behaviors. And actually, you know what? The doctors that I've heard so far, and I haven't been listening to a lot, but so far on BBC Radio 4, what I have heard is doctors saying what they would like to see encourage is actually people getting out more and just moving more. And I think, wow, that actually sounds like a bit of a shift to me. Um, and that was really good to hear. So I hope that is something that is picked up more and more. Um, in terms of shame, what I sometimes say to my clients is try to externalize the shame. This is something you have learned to feel ashamed about. It is not something that is an appropriate um, reason to be feeling shame about being in a bigger body. It is shame that has been given to you by others, and you can give it back. So you can picture yourself whenever you feel the shame, just remember this isn't mine. Just give it back. This is not my shame. I'm not a bad person because I exist in a bigger body. All right. I hope that was somewhat helpful. That was quite totally off the cuff. I didn't prepare this, all these responses, so I'm not sure that it followed a logical progression. But I hope you followed along. By all means, respond, answer, ask more questions, and I would really like to hear from you soon. And I'll be back next week. So if you have more questions you'd like me to answer about this or your relationship with food or body image, pop me a question here, anywhere on social media, or via my website, www.peacefuleating.co.uk/questions and answers. And do download my guide to peaceful eating. It's not very long. It'll take you 20 minutes or half an hour to read, but it is rich and it will really give you a good grounding in everything I'm talking about here. And you can get that at peacefuleating.co.uk/subscribe. That's peacefuleating.co.uk/subscribe. See, I managed to do that without getting my tongue twisted again. All right, take care. Bye for now.